Poverty, strife, conflict, and corruption. These are common narratives on the continent. But this is another side untold, the side of wealth, riches, and the continent with most blessed resources. Until you change a man's thinking, you cannot change his life. Africa's story has been written by others. We need to own our challenges and solutions and write our stories. Only Africans can build Africa. My name is Henry Williams. Join me on the agenda on Love War Plus. Issue on the African scene, the politics of succession in Africa, the crisis of stability and power. How critical is this?
Police arrested 12 people from the palace in Johannesburg, while 8 others were arrested.
Well, on our last episode, we started a discussion on the burning problem of brain drain and its impact on development in Africa. Brain drain, which is the emigration of skilled nationals, which results in the depletion of skilled human resource in countries of origin, losing doctors, engineers, professors, and other skilled professionals. Now, how detrimental can this be to any country? How can we reverse the trend or make immigration work in our favor, like it has done for countries like India or China? Well, before we go any further, my name is Henry Williams. Welcome to the show. And remember that you can find us at www.loveworldplus.tv or go to any of the online stores to download our app, Love World Plus, and you are good to go. I want to say a welcome to my guest, Dayo Fagbolu, in his cerebral capacities here with me. Thank you very much, Dayo. Great to see you.
It's a pleasure.
All right, and yes, it's a promise kept. We will have Dr. Anthony Osagale and the African economy analyst, Kelechi Deka, join us as the show progresses, so don't go anywhere. Now, as we take a look at what we discussed, we'd like to take you on a journey of a recap of what we discussed, and we will be right back, so don't go away. But let me pose this to Dayo. What are your thoughts on this issue? Is it something that we should be talking about right now?
Now, I'm not saying in terms of just the nation alone. If you were in a particular place and the risk was high, maybe there were arrows flying or bullets flying, the first thing you say to yourself is, can I move away from this uncertain place? All human beings will move away from uncertainty towards certainty.
You lose tax revenue because all these persons who are going out, if they stayed in Nigeria, would have been paying taxes. You lose the possibility of potential future entrepreneurship because many of these people will probably be engaged in some entrepreneurial activities. They may want to go into private practice, all right, which will, of course, contribute to the economy of the nation as we see it. Again, there's a shortage of important and skilled healthcare. That is what is also leading to what we are finding now, medical tourism, which is another big multi-million-dollar industry annually, even running to billions. People move out of the country to go and see, in many cases, Nigerians who are working abroad in those hospitals.
The overall impact on development, as my friend in the studio tried to push across, is there. It has a very negative impact on the development of the country and also the development of the continent as a whole. But you don't address it in isolation. First and foremost, it's important that we get it clear. Migration is a universal concept.
All right, yeah, we did quite a bit, and it was quite heating up until time ran out on the show, and we decided to have a sequel to this discussion. And I want to thank my guests for making it. It hasn't been easy for them, but yes, it's a promise kept. Once more, Dayo, great to have you. And yes, as we discussed, one thing we established was that everyone has the right to move to wherever they want to, as long as they have the means to do so. But what has happened from research, from interaction, we've seen that a lot of Africans who have moved out of the country want to come back. they would rather come back if they had a choice to. But it seems like they've been forced into it's been a forced exile, more like, and people like you who have children abroad, more like have banished them there, to stay because they don't find a place belonging back at home. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, like I said to you the last time I was here, I mean, the theory that governs that part of immigration is that of power distancing. How accessible is power to you? Now, if power is accessible to them, if they can reach out and just grab power, it's equal zone. They don't think of home. It's a question of, look, wherever I lay my hat is, that's where my home is. But you see, if they think of home because they're looking at situations where, well, okay, I went to school with the Minister of Information, I went to school with the President, or I know the President's daughter, and these are more comfortable environments for them. But the reality is, when it comes to the other indices of uncertainty, when it comes to issues of masculinity, like I talked about, you find that people will just stay there. So look, as far as I'm concerned, like I said, I mean, movement, the migration of human beings is a normal thing, but different reasons people will have to move, and some will want to come back. You come back because there's so many reasons why. Like I told you, I mean, culturally, certain values have been inculcated in you within the ages of, 0 to 10 years.
So those who have lived here a while before leaving, who are not, born there.
Well, what I mean is that your sense of taste, your in terms of the food you like the sour, the sweet, you like the periwinkles. I mean, these are things that you
hustle and bustle of
let's call it the hustle and bustle. Let's call them values, inculcated values, and usually that happens between the ages of 0 to 10. Okay, now because of these values, you long for them because they are instilled in your coded system. It's a program, like I said to you, and it's instilled in your system. So you long for these things. That's where the longing to come home is. But the reality is there are other indices that we talked about: uncertainty, masculinity. Now, all those other issues will determine eventually, will weigh the odds, and it'll be, okay, is it worth it or not? You take a decision. And that's the bottom line.
Okay, former South African President Thabo Mbeki, late Thabo Mbeki, in blessed memory, labeled Africa's brain drain as very frightening. It says Africa's lost 20,000 academics and 10% of highly skilled information technology and finance professionals, as at then when he said it. I said brain drain can be extremely harmful if you live in an African nation with a limited pool of qualified individuals to begin with. Right. And in that light, there is another challenge. It is something that we've heard a lot of professionals. No matter how successful you are, you still remain a second-class citizen.
That is not true.
Okay. All right. I'll take your response right after this break, so don't go away. We'll be right back.
We must not allow fear to stand in our way. I have fought against white domination.
No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream.
we must remember that every one of us has something to give, something to contribute. Only Nigerians can help develop Nigeria. All that we require in our nation for our prosperity, our security, our progress will come from within us. And therefore, each one of us must be ready and willing to be a vital part of it.
We're topping the charts there, but before we went for that break, I was posing a question to Dio here, talking about the way Africans are abroad. Can they actually fit in the way they would at home? The question of being a second-class citizen that many have raised in that light, but you actually deferred that, didn't you?
Yes, well, look, we need to look at these things very clearly. For instance, I mean, a scientist, let's look at a specific form of science. We call it mechatronics. It's the emergence of mechanical engineering and electronics. And basically, they are the ones that are into robotics and all those kind of practices. Now, most of these guys are engrossed in their research. It's a daily routine. They come in. The respect that is given to you is how much you know and how much you can contribute to the system. It's simple. There's no disrespect there. I mean, people don't view you from the perspective of whether you're black, white, or gray. It's your contribution to the system. It goes on to professions like medicine. I mean, a guy doesn't walk in and say, you know what, gentlemen, don't treat me because you're black. So, you see, it depends on what your contributions are in every society. Even in Nigeria, if you're really important and people's lives, I mean, you've been hearing about these COVID problems over the months. And you've been hearing that they talk about the first cardiology, first something cardiology, first something. How come everybody's going there? It just says that is an important person in the system at this moment. So really, it's the scale of your importance, like I said, that determines whether you fit into society or not. Simple.
Okay, you've heard, people talking about, history in the past. Yes, Africa has suffered an export of its best minds through slavery.
Right.
That's a history that we cannot deny. But do you see a modern-day slavery going
definitely.
Here,
look,
a kind of neo-colonialism as a result of this?
Without being rude to anybody, I see Nigeria itself and most African nations as a fingerling farm. I've said this once, where when the little fish things are there, the eggs hatch and they come out, they now transfer them to the larger pool to breed them for the kill. That is basically what Nigeria is, and I'll tell you why. You see, for a nation to evolve in its fullness, there are certain qualities that are required. Now, in the educational system, there are two forms of education that actually give impact. One of them is called the tacit form of education, and one of them is called the explicit form. The explicit form is going to school and learning the theories. The tacit form is the traditions and the practical process of knowledge being transferred from generation to generation. Now, for any nation to evolve, what you need is both. So let us look at the Nigerian scenario as an example. 800 years ago, we were already casting grade 1 bronze figures in Ile-Ife.
That's a rare skill.
Now, it's a skill that, if you transfer it to modern day, it is used to make blocks of engines, to reproduce in other forms of machinery and technology that we can reuse. India uses it a lot. Now, the bottom line is, in 800 years, that skill form has disappeared to a certain degree. Now, but we had it 800 years ago. So what we're saying is that the tacit forms of knowledge were not being advanced. They were being diminished. So all we have here is a stock farm, basically to feed the larger farms, because the tacit forms of knowledge do no longer exist in our systems.
Why is this not glaring, and why is there no alarm to this? Is it because we don't have an industrialized system right now?
No. Sometimes it's just, look, it's the simple things. Making bread. It's the simple things. The pap that our mothers used to make. There's a science behind the pap that our mothers made. It's a starch that needed to be, boiled at a certain temperature, mixed at a certain temperature. There's a dynamic to it. There's a science to it. And basically, when you keep on transferring those forms of knowledge from generation to generation, they evolve into higher forms of knowing, because it's experiential. Now, in this case, we have lost it. The Igbos came and just cut it. Boom. Sorry, I'm using the oddest analogies.
Okay.
But the bottom line is, they have disconnected us. So we're only good for one thing now as it is, to feed their own knowledge systems. Because all we have is the foundations of tacit, explicit knowledge as opposed to tacit forms of knowledge. We cannot combine them into innovation.
You find, okay, that's the system you're trying to say now that it's obsolete in terms of transfer of knowledge now.
Listen.
Okay?
It's not only obsolete. It was designed strategically.
To sabotage.
Yes, we're basically like people who are employed to work in the civil service or to work in the big corporation. That's all you are. They groom you with enough skills to work in the big corporation. When they say go, you go. When they say come, you come. But the concept of innovation in itself, to evolve into a structure that creates things, a thinking structure.
Is that why we wait for vaccines to come from other parts of the world?
Yes,
because
that is why.
In spite of all the citadels of learning that we have in Africa.
Look, that is precisely what the problem is. We are explicit in terms of our knowledge. We know the stuff. We cannot apply it. We have cut off the arm that applies knowledge in experience. It doesn't exist anymore. It's been eroded.
I'd like to bring in, Dr. Segele at this point, and I certainly hope he's been brought online so we can actually take this further. When we talk of brain drain, one sector that has been very glaring and where we see a yawning gap is in the health sector because of how critical that sector is to every daily life. And doctors have, they've seen an exodus of doctors all over Africa going to the West. This seems a replication of what you are saying right now.
It's very simple. I mean, one doesn't need to look too far. I mean, excuse me. People will move from uncertainty to certainty. The skills they have groomed into these kids, they designed them for places that work. As a labor force, that's what they are. I mean, you won't see them being health minister in America, for instance. In the UK, you won't see them being health minister. But they are doctors, well-schooled doctors that can carry out processes that have been laid down. They might not be innovating in terms of process, but they already have the tacit arms of knowledge, so it doesn't matter to them. What they do is they provide the equipment, the stethoscopes, the drugs, the vaccines, the injections. Just carry out your job like labor.
All right, and definitely we have more to talk about. Has government played a critical role in helping to drive this anomaly of brain drain in Africa? We'll be finding out more about this when we return, so don't go away. We'll be right back.
Many people long for success. They desire to do something with their lives, to make a difference in society, to become famous, or to become great. We all have the want to move from ordinary to extraordinary, to make the leap from good to great, to turn the seed of greatness that is in us into a fruitful field and to fulfill the call of God upon our lives. From Reverend Dr. Chris Oyakhilome comes this new and riveting book, The Power of Your Mind. Do you want to do something extraordinary with your life? See, God has given you an excellent tool to use in your journey of greatness. It is called your mind. Learn how to walk in divine excellence through the power of a renewed mind. Get your copy of The Power of Your Mind today.
From Lagos
to London, from Johannesburg
for several years, our economy
to the United States,
identifying houses of worship.
We have all the world covered for you, no matter where you are.
Love with News is at the heart of it all.
I have experience.
We bring you our perspectives of stories behind the story.
The signs given to us for the entry of these things are before us.
Join us.
Join us.
Join us on this station.
All right, great to have you back after a short break. And we've been talking about the impact of brain drain in Africa. Dayo Fagbulu is here with me, and he's actually brought some insights to bear on the discussion. One of them is the, how do you call it, the system which we operate educationally, which has been designed not to enable us actualize,
it's designed
to
feed functional systems.
Feed functional systems.
Systems that are operational already, that work. I mean, look, it's
just enough to take you to a certain point, and then from there,
that's where it ends. Look, see, the core component of nation building in itself is innovation. That means if they give you, just like the talents in the story of the Bible, they give you 5 talents, you turn it around with innovation.
I like that analogy.
It's the content in which you use to turn around, things, innovation. But you see, you need 2 major components to do that, like I said. You need the learning that we have, the explicit ones, the degrees, the scholarly things. They're very easy to grab. The hard part of knowledge to grab is the ones that are difficult to explain, right? How your mother makes pap, how she makes amala. Those little sciences that have been transferred from generation to generation. It is stated very clearly that to know something is purely experiential. Because what happens is when you experience it, what you do is you wait, you judge it, you pass judgment, you take a decision. Now, that informs you for the next process. When you do not experience something, there is nothing to follow up on. It's purely a theory.
All right. Purely a theory. And yes, I'm told that Dr. Segale is online. Doctor, great to have you join us on the show. Okay, we can hear you right now, so let's see how that can be tweaked a bit so we can hear you. We can't hear Doctor now. One thing, it's interesting to ask this because what role has government played in all of this? Because we find out examples where we find out that sending people abroad, especially in times of, in desperate situations, in times of, how do you call it, settlement, okay, for agitations, is to send, people abroad. We don't actually, can't we train people back home in Nigeria? Can't we set up systems to actually train skills, these skills that you're talking about? Do we have to send people abroad like we sent the Chibok girls, we sent the militants abroad? Is there, does that actually also sabotage the desire to set up a system that works back at home?
Let me try and look at this thing from a slightly different perspective. Now, one of the things that projects excellence in itself is a reward for the effort, that you have put in. Now, I was reading an article a few days ago when some girl protested that she wasn't admitted into the University of Ife medical school to study medicine. Now, by the time the analysis was given, she scored about 320 in JAMB. By the time the registrar or some guy in the University of Ife gave an analysis, they found that if you add her scores to her WAEC scores, there were 100, with 320, there were over 150 or 105 people that also could not get admission. They were only admitting 100 people, or about 105.
Within the same range?
Yes. I mean, they did so well. So it tells us something, that the standards in that particular field are concentrated in specific areas and not in others. Now, the man raised the point and said, if she was not from the particular catchment area that she came from, with her 320, she would have been given admission. Automatically, merit has been removed from the process. She has been caught up in a meritorious system. But for others, the answer is no. Now, it tells you something. Why do I want to remain in a system that does not reward me for doing the right thing? Why do I want to stay in a system where excellent or excellence is not the watchword? I want value for everything I have done. Now, let us look at it from the real perspective. You spend maybe 4 or 5 years on a first degree. You spend maybe 18 months or 2 years on a second degree. And you spend between 4 and 6.5 years for a doctorate. Now, let's add this together. 6.5 plus 4 is about 10. 10 plus 2 is another, let's say like 12 years. Let's say you spend 12 years educating yourself. And right beside you is a gentleman who just vies for Senate because he has a school certificate. And he gets into Senate and he earns 50 times what you earn.
At least 10 million a month.
Right. Now my question to you is, how do you want to give your best? The system in itself must be a value-based system. It must tell you that if you excel, you will do well for people to want to stay within it. Like I told you, the quality of uncertainty is high. People are uncomfortable. After I have devoted my life to excellence, right beside me, they pull a young man and say, he's the most unexcellent man we have around, but he's from another catchment area. No nation is built on those qualities.
That is a very pathetic picture you've painted, and if that is the experience, then there is a big challenge you were faced with. I'll bring in Dr. Segale in at this point. Doctor, welcome back.
Yeah, thank you. I hope you can hear me now.
Yeah, great. We can hear you loud and clear. I hope you've been listening to the discussion we've been having, and Dio has actually taken us down a route that says, look, we have actually exalted the ridiculous and at the detriment of merit, and that has also caused the forced exile that we found a lot of our experts being pushed into. And your sector has been very glaring, considering the fact that it is a very critical sector to every human being. It is a pro-life sector, a sector that we cannot do without. We've seen an exodus of doctors countless times. And I do recall a discussion we had some time ago. You said that looking at the dispensation of how doctors have left, during the 80s, we saw the boom in Saudi Arabia, see some Nigerian doctors move. And then we saw Canada coming up, and you said there's another exodus in the offing here.
Yes. It's amazing that the health sector of Nigeria has been losing a large proportion of its experienced workforce. And that's a big dilemma, because when you lose your experienced workforce, and medicine and the health sector as you know it is an apprenticeship profession. And you have to see cases and be exposed to cases and then be able to gain that experience and then handle cases that may be close to it when it presents itself in the future. So when you lose the top hands, you lose the experienced folks from the sector. What it does is that it has reduced the general body of knowledge, it has reduced the general level of excellence across board in the particular sector. And then again, aside from this, what we are beginning to find is a trend. Currently now, you are going to see a trend exacerbated by this COVID-19 pandemic that has gone around the world, where many countries are opening up and just trying to drag in young doctors into their country, like what the UK is doing right now. And they are allowing through their new legislation that is just kicking off, I think it's this August or September, where people can come in under a new category of visa into America, into the United Kingdom rather. I'm sure you saw in the news a couple of weeks back where certain persons were turned back from the airport. All right, a large number of them where they would get their visa on arrival and so on. They didn't have a visa in their passports, but they were trying to beat the timing that was given for the particular immigration legislation. And most of them were largely young doctors. So the exodus is real. The exodus is massive. And it's not just affecting the experienced staff. Right now, you're also seeing it affecting just the young ones just coming out of the university, coming out of NYSC, looking for ways to get out of the country. And the reasons are not far-fetched. And it's something that can actually be addressed, but it has to be addressed in a systematic manner. There has to be a re-engineering of the systems thinking of the government of this country, as well as governments across Africa. There has to be a re-engineering of the systems thinking as regards value system, as regards meritocracy, as regards the reward for excellence. All right, there has to be a re-engineering, and it has to start from the concept of health sector being a system. I said this the last time I was on. The health sector is a system. What I have found happening in Nigeria and in some African countries, the politicians and those in power seem to focus so much emphasis on building physical structures. They build physical structures, some of them gigantic structures, but when you get inside of them, a lot of times they are not properly equipped, or if they are properly equipped, they don't have the manpower to use the equipment. It's unfortunate. They don't have the trained manpower to use the equipment. So they focus so much on building physical structures. The contracts are given out, awarded, billions are paid out, the hospitals are built. At the end of the day, at the same time of building these hospitals and building these structures, there is no plan on the table in engaging qualified personnel to run the hospitals, qualified personnel to use the medical equipment to help the people. So this is one thing that you have been saying.
Doctor, okay, you've pointed out something very critical here. You said government would rather build structures without investing in personnel, which is very key.
The manpower development.
Human capital, very key. Investing in equipment, and we just see superstructures, more like they are hollow and nothing inside of it.
That's exactly what you find in a lot of places, especially when you're looking at new investments in healthcare system. The trend for a dynamic and a world-class healthcare system has gone beyond the way it's being thought of in Africa right now. The private sector in a lot of countries, for example, in India, is driving the health sector, but the involvement of government is critical. Now, this is how it's supposed to play out. There is the investment in infrastructure. There is the investment in hospital appliances and supplies. But there has to be a concerted effort in investing in a second plank, a second leg of the tripod. That second leg is the manpower. The third leg is the enabling environment outside of the hospital system. So you look at the structures, you look at the equipment, you look at the medical supplies. Then you look at the most important parts of this, the human capital development. You're talking about the doctors, you're talking about the pharmacists, you're talking about the nurses, you're talking about all the allied health personnel that make the system work. Now, what is needed here? You have to put a system in place where you can entice qualified personnel to come into the system, and the qualified and experienced personnel you have to remain in the system, and then the young ones who are coming up will have experienced people to understudy. And at the end of the day, you are upgrading the general standard of that health system in that particular environment. But that's not what we are saying.
Thank you very much, Doctor.
Is going down, numbers are going down. Then remuneration, the welfare of the staff, is something that is a major factor that is making people leave. People want better jobs, people want better pay.
Well, Dio, how do we strike a balance here? You're talking about investing in human capital. You talked about the issue of merit. Where does the system, actually fail us here when we talk about retention of our professionals? Where do you think we should start from? If we're to retain the professionals now, what do we need to change in the system?
Everything. That's the best way to put it. Look, like I said to you, we refer to the national culture as a mental program, a collective mental program. That's what a culture is, which involves your value systems, your practices, your heroes, your rules. I mean, there's a mental imprint. We're not talking about something that you can just discard. Look, we need to take kids from the primary schools. We need to start speaking a different language to them. It's more of indoctrination than anything else. We need to first change the culture. You see, it's the way you think. And I'll give you an example. A few days ago, the president said something which I found really interesting. He said he was really trying his best. The man didn't lie. What he's doing is his best. That's the point I make you. He is not designed for an era like today. His culture in itself, that which is imbibed in him, is not what suits development. He can only perceive development from his own perspective. The man is really trying. But that is his idea of what a trial is.
You can't give what you do not have, right?
Well, I guess we all know that. And that's what the point is. Look, they're really trying. They're putting a sincere effort. They are restrained by that which they have been brought up with. The mental programming and cultures that say this is what the standards are. My brother, the starting point is we must up the standard, the demand that is placed on each one of us. Everybody from religious leaders to teachers to politicians, the standard must be the same. We must all be held accountable. If we're not held accountable to man, we should be held accountable to God. And God has set his standards already. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, thou shalt not covet thy brother's property. Then let us go into the human laws. They have all kinds of things. Corruption must not do. You must not steal. You must not cheat. All these things are there. We must up our standards. The bar must be lifted. This concept where you say a child scores 100, gets admission, while some child scores, no. Let every child strive for excellence. If you want any form of equity, what you need to do is, if the quota for the North is not filled in a particular year, leave it open to understand that it's a sacrifice. But don't admit mediocre minds to come and solve major problems. Like I told you, this child scored 320 and couldn't get admission into University of Ife, medical school. It tells you what the standards are like there. That is the minimum standard we should have all about. Let us strive for excellence. Let us push towards perfection. It's the only way forward. Everything else is child's play.
All right, and turning to Dr. Anthony now. Dr. Anthony, we talked about something very interesting last time. We talked about the global health community and how much is being spent in terms of support systems, for developing countries. We have organizations like Doctors Without Borders sending professionals, and these professionals are sent here with, very healthy packages, to actually execute their work. And we talked about these investments. Couldn't this investment be diverted to actually the home countries and their professionals directly to help them to boost the morale and expertise and develop the system from bottom up and not the other way around?
Yeah, that's a very lovely one. I'm going to highlight something here when I'm considering this particular area. It's okay for organizations to want to intervene in some countries and see how they can up the structure. But you see, it's very difficult to help somebody from outside without doing something about the system in that particular locality or that country that is generating or even supporting the current trend or the current status that is being sought to be optimized. Okay. Now, what we find at the end of the day, a lot of colleagues of mine who at the end of the day are engaged when these organizations come into the country, because they're not just going to work in the air, they come in and they have to work with partners, professionals on the ground who are here. A lot of times, many of these doctors and health personnel eventually get engaged by these incoming organizations. And before you know what is happening, if those organizations are going somewhere or they have interventions in other countries, these health personnel are posted out, some of them. All right. And then at the end of the day, this in a way may also even be contributing to the brain drain that we are talking about, because what they are doing at the end of the day doesn't really support, for example, turning up of more health professionals in the country through proper education. It doesn't really support at the end of the day having the experienced personnel on ground and existing medical personnel on ground, improving their the environment of work for them, or even tackling the major plank. For me, the major factor, while doctors, nurses are relocating, the financial remuneration and their welfare. Let me quickly give you an example of what I mean. Now, up until a couple of months ago, did you know that the hazard allowance for medical personnel across board, particularly doctors, per month was 5,000 naira? Hazard allowance. Just recently, it was when the federal government decided, oh, this is a pittance. How could we have made such a mistake after so many years? And then they said they were going to up it. And that resulted after a while in a strike action being called by the NAD that the agreement was not being honored. And then I think they're saying something about this last week or this week, they're going to comment.
Okay, we lost Dr. Anthony there, but we'll be bringing in Kelechi Deka very soon, that's African economy analyst, to give us his fair share of the discussion. But it's really sad, Dyer, when we talk about these issues. He's just talked about what doctors go through, the take home, and we saw the Minister of Health at one point in time says, look, I'm not aware of what these doctors are facing. And this is just one sector we're talking about. We have other sectors as well. You've talked about the teachers as well.
The core thing he said there? Yeah. He said you need the experienced people.
Yeah, the experienced people.
To teach the younger ones. He said because the core is the experiential knowledge. Exactly. You see, you must transfer knowledge. That's the only way to up it. From generation to generation, so you can improve.
So we are sabotaged by this.
Oh yes, oh yes. Oh yes.
We are sabotaged by this.
That part is, when people talk about medical doctors, I mean, you need to talk about even skilled technicians, the machinist, the robotics engineer, those guys that are, they're down there that make things work. Look, the guys that really make things work. The theoretical guys are one side.
There is knowledge management here that has to take place.
Look, now, it brings us to other problems. That we shouldn't talk about. Now we have industrial areas in Lagos, industrial areas. And the essence of an industrial area is that industries are supposed to be close together to support each other technically. Proximity. That's what industrial areas are designed to do.
It's deliberate, right?
Yes, and also to transfer knowledge. You do not break the bonds of an industrial area. You don't come in between. Those industries should be protected and set aside. But we have cut them short. We've said, you know what, listen, we want value, we want monetary value as opposed to these forms of technology that will develop the nation eventually.
Long term.
Now listen, let me tell you what we have lost. We have lost a skilled band of people that will actually make the things we use. All the things you see, the production things you see, the equipment. We used to have people that mold makers, machine makers. They built these things from down up. Now they don't exist. So we have become the nation that just goes a-buying. We have intentionally, out of greed, wiped out the class of people that are one of the most important to the development of a nation.
The foundation.
What conversation are we having? These foundations have been eroded completely. We have to, it's like saying, let's make a serious, the sacrifice is so painful now the stage at which we have reached, the sacrifices we need to make are so painful.
All right. They are so painful, and Dio passionately states this. And yes, one group that's definitely we need to make sure that we take care of are the youth. And there is a report, there is, what do you call it, according to analysts, that in 2030, I mean, Africa is going towards a youthful demographic, where it will, even the countries like Nigeria will have a population of youthful people that will even surpass the United States. Now, African students of the Business School of the University of Oxford in the United Kingdom were talking about brain drain. And the discussion centered on the phenomenon and what it means for the African continent. Let's take a look at this report, and when we come back, we should be bringing in our economy analyst, Kelechi Decker.
Success will either be advanced or hindered.
African students of the Business School of the University of Oxford in the United Kingdom this weekend talked brain drain. The discussion centered on the phenomenon and what it means for the African continent. It formed part of the Oxford Business Forum Africa.
The guys who are meant to be having these conversations, who are meant to be helping us deal with the rand that's plummeting, and who are meant to be shaping South Africa's future, or Africa's future for that matter, are somewhere in Europe helping the pound thrive, or somewhere in the US helping that thrive. And every time we talk about a continent, we talk about this continent that is regressing, not because it was doomed.
A growing concern, analysts say the continent is hardest hit, with thousands of students going to Europe and North America each year.
What struck me most about working internationally was the advancement and all the good things and amazing things that you see. But what's a shame is always going back home and not seeing the same thing. So I would actually want to be able to go back home. But what frustrates me is not being made aware of the opportunities that are back home as well.
This phenomenon deprives Africa of its best assets, it's been suggested. A 2013 study by Jacana Africa Private Equity says 70% of African graduates prefer to return to work in their home country.
All right, that report there gives us a clear picture of what is happening when you talk about youths who are in diaspora. There's no doubt about it that people want to come back home. But you asked the question, come back to what? Where do they fit in?
Some people want to come back home. But see, like the question is always the same. With your skill set, will the system reward you for the sincere effort you've put in? Where would you work? Where are your contributions appreciated? All these are questions, and I gave a good example of one of my kids who has programmed for Intel for a whole year, who works for Subnautical. And what do I want to bring her back to do here is the question I need to ask you. Where is she going to fit in? The ports are in disarray, for starters. They're probably disjointed from the global shipping system. And we can go on and on and on. Where do you want to bring back an instrumentation engineer, for instance, to work, except NMPC, that is practically in crisis? Dangote's refinery, my experiences with Dangote's refinery is you hardly get paid when you work for them. So at the bottom line,
is there an opportunity for people to take ownership and say as stakeholders in a system and salvage the system? Is there an opportunity that has been created at one point in time, or do we have to create that opportunity?
I'll tell you what I think. I think there's a strength in numbers. I think some of the most intellectualized numbers we have are in diaspora. I've said this once before. One of the things we could do in diaspora is we could take specific projects, okay, and lobby everybody and say, listen, to build this industry up, let's say pharmaceuticals, this is what we need. Please make a commitment towards it. And what I mean by that is, in terms of skill, online training, physical presence, finances, let us build that particular industry up. If it's plastics, petrochemicals, wax, let's look into it and say, okay, look, and at different points in time, let us engage specific projects. If it's education, let's fund the educational system in such a way, not waiting for government to take charge.
All
look, I'll tell you, I want to tell you a story, a very silly one. A long time ago, I know a man who was my father, he's passed on now. He was the chief inspector of education of the Western region. The junior inspectors wrote to him and said, the standards in Government College Ibadan, which was a premier school, exemplary school, were declining. And my father wrote then to the commissioner and said, listen, we will have to shut down Government College if they do not meet the required educational standards by the next inspection. He was told off. Now let us be clear. This was a Harvard-trained, doctoral chief inspector of education. The commissioner himself, of course, and evidently wasn't as qualified. It was a political appointment. Eventually, they had to do an inspection, and they confirmed that exactly what the junior inspector said is what was happening. Now, this is the routine. I mean, we're talking about the 70s. It has been a constant trend in the Nigerian system, these interfering unqualified politicians trying to build the system up.
So we are back to merit.
So, the bottom line is, those of us who consider ourselves to be professionals in diaspora and here should form a little clique, not a little clique, a massive clique,
and push.
and try and push this system, build value in our systems, ignoring these governmental politicians that can do nothing.
We need to take ownership, and yes, and that is where we will leave the discussion. I want to thank all of my guests and thank Dr. Anthony Osegale, whom we lost during the course of the discussion, though he definitely made his point and his mark as well. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dio, for coming on the show. It's been great having you. One thing is certain, the African Union predicts that unless things change by 2030, only about 12 million African youths will have had a tertiary education. And that gives us a picture. That means we must all arise to take ownership. We must do something and not sit on our hands and throw up our hands in exasperation. On that note, I want to thank you for staying with us on The Agenda. Don't forget, you can always watch us at www.loveworldplus.tv and send your comments and contributions. And don't forget, you can go to any of the online stores to download our app, Love World Plus. It's been great having you on the show. And yes, and one thing is certain, as I always say, only Africans can build Africa. My name is Henry Williams. Thanks for staying with us, and see you same time. Bye-bye. Issue on the African scene, the politics of succession in Africa, the crisis of stability and power. How critical is this?
Police arrested 12 people from the palace in Johannesburg, while 8 others were arrested.